In the morning he put on his pants and found the cuffs piled on the floor. He thought the clothes had shrunk in the wash and didn't think much of it, but only a few days later, he couldn't even match his wife's height. Kyle never suspected himself. Middle-aged, a little stooped, osteoporosis. Those explanations sounded more normal than his body actually shrinking. He went to work as usual, came home as usual, and let his height drop centimeter by centimeter until the family cat started staring at him. That look was wrong, not the look of a pet looking at its owner, but the look of a predator locking onto prey. Not long after, he really became smaller than the cat. One swipe of its paw could knock him over, and it chased him all over the house. His wife was afraid something would happen and drove the cat outside, but the shrinking never slowed. He couldn't climb onto the bed, and his wife didn't dare sleep next to him. One roll and she could crush him into pulp. In the end he moved into his daughter's dollhouse. At first he even found it kind of fun, like being a kid again. He had no idea the real deadly trouble was still ahead. The cat that had been thrown out slipped back in through the pet door. Kyle panicked and ran straight into a fishhook. Blood started seeping out at once. The smell of blood instantly triggered the cat's hunting instinct. He grabbed a big pushpin and swung it wildly, but to the cat that little thing wasn't even enough to scratch an itch. In the scramble his foot found empty air and he tumbled straight down a crack in the wall into the basement. He shouted for his wife at the top of his lungs, but his voice was too small. No one upstairs could hear it. When his wife found the cat back in the house, her heart skipped a beat and she turned and chased it upstairs. She was sure Kyle had already been eaten by the cat. Kyle stood on the basement floor listening to his wife's footsteps grow farther and farther away. That night he wrapped himself in a scrap of cloth and endured the dust and cold until dawn. For the first time he truly felt that the world had completely forgotten him. The next day his daughter's voice floated down from upstairs. Kyle ran for the stairwell with everything he had, yelling until his throat was raw, but the sound couldn't even climb the steps. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote his name on the floor. Those few letters looked huge and clear to him. To normalize, they were just an insignificant scratch on the floorboards. When hunger got bad he remembered a mousetrap in the corner of the basement that still had half a piece of cheese on it. He pried the mechanism open with a nail and finally got a decent meal. But the smell of the cheese also drew something else, a spider slowly closing in from behind. Kyle waved the nail and scared the spider off, his whole back soaked in cold sweat. He finally realized that things he used to crush with one step could now kill him. He carved a hole in a cardboard box and turned it into a temporary shelter. More than 10 days passed and no one came down looking for him. The initial panic slowly wore away and was replaced by a kind of numbness. When he was hungry he looked for food, when he was tired he slept, when he heard a noise he hid. But that spider never left, it just watched him from the dark. Kyle knew he was still shrinking. Once he got one size smaller, the spider wouldn't be afraid of the nail in his hand anymore. Then his hand slipped and he fell into an abandoned bathtub. Suddenly a few little fish only a couple of centimeters long darted past his feet. The fish didn't attack him, but by the time he climbed out the spider was already blocking the way. He tried to trap it under a bottle cap and failed, so he had to pick up the nail and fight it head on. The struggle lasted several hours. The spider knew the terrain and had every advantage. In the end Kyle put everything he had into it, stabbed out one of the spider's eyes, and barely got away. He lit a small wad of scrap paper and used the flame to drive the spider back, finally catching his breath. Months went by and Kyle had already shrunk smaller than an ant. Steps he used to cross in a single stride now rose in front of him like high walls. That day footsteps came from upstairs. He shouted at the top of his lungs the way he always did, but it was a real estate agent walking and talking on the phone, completely unable to hear the sound under his feet. Kyle almost got stepped on and killed. Only then did he fully understand that his wife had long since decided he was dead and was selling the house. Then a mosquito flew past the window. If a mosquito could get out, so could he. The window was 3 meters up, for someone only 5 millimeters tall. That was a mountain. But staying in the basement was a dead end. Climbing up at least gave him a chance. He started climbing. For 4 whole days he barely rested and had nothing to eat, surviving on pure will. When he finally reached the desktop, a 3-centimeter wide crack stretched across his path. There was nowhere to go back. He took a running start, jumped, and crashed onto the floor on the other side, bones nearly coming apart. Only one last stretch remained to the window, and a spider web blocked the way. The spider in the center of the web was already moving, heading straight for him. At the critical moment a flying insect hit the other end of the web. The spider instantly changed direction and lunged for the bigger prey. Kyle seized the chance, slipped past, and charged all the way to the window, but the mesh of the screen was still too fine. He couldn't squeeze through. He could only wait until he shrank a little more, small enough to slip through a hole in the mesh. Every day he just sat by the window, looking at the sky outside, feeling his body shrink millimeter by millimeter. Freedom or death, he didn't know which would arrive first. That day he was woken by pain. Several ants were chewing on his lower leg. Right after that the same persistent spider appeared again, its eyes locked back on him. Kyle turned and forced himself into the screen. In the split second before the spider pounced, his body shrank just enough to pass through the mesh. He squeezed out, and the world in front of him was completely different. Blades of grass had become towering trees. The lawn had turned into a primeval forest. Kyle didn't know where his wife and daughter had gone, or whether he would ever see them again. He only knew that from this moment on, the real test of survival had just begun.